everyone. Welcome to the second question on Indian polity. So let us see the question. It goes like, critically examine the efforts of legislature, executive and judiciary in upholding the secular credentials of our constitution. So let us try to understand the question or decode the question a bit. So the question is on secularism, and the question asks us to identify or examine the efforts of the three organs of the state, the legislature, judiciary and executive, in upholding the secular credentials. But we have to critically examine. Okay, so two things to look there: critically and examine. So what do you mean by examine? So when you say that you have to examine something, what are we intending? So examination means what? If you are to examine maybe something under a microscope, what will you do? You will list out everything that you see out there, right? And then you try to make an inference based on your observation. That's what you do by examination, which means it's a close appraisal of the topic in question. Okay, that is one way you can think in terms of UPSC. So earlier when we are discussing, we would just give out random arguments, but examination means you look it in a more closer manner. You have to look into the more nuances of it. It can't go in a generic way. You have to look into specifics. Okay, secularism under legislature, this happened, this didn't happen. Like, it has to be specific. Okay, then critically examine. So what do you mean by critically examine? So here the word critically, okay, the word critically means it's not about offering a criticism to the question or criticism to the idea of, or criticism to the role of legislature, executive and judiciary. That's not what is intended. The idea is to offer a critique to the role of legislature, executive and judiciary with respect to secularism. So what do you mean by critique? I would say, I would suggest all of you to look at the dictionary meaning of critique. Critique means you have to, you have to look into the pros and cons of it. It's not one-sided. Okay, it's not negative alone. Okay, so when critically and examine come together, you have to explore this topic in very fine detail, and you have to look at both the pros and cons of it. Okay, so that's all that is there to it. So coming to our question at hand, you have to look into the role of legislature, executive and judiciary in upholding secularism as well as in not upholding secularism, right? So much has to be the meaning that you take from this question. So that's our first thing. Now we have to move to the structure of the answer, right? So structure here, it is pretty simple, easy to understand. So your introduction can be again about defining secularism, right? So let the examiner understand what is the idea of secularism that you have in your mind, because once you define it here, it's easy for the examiner to evaluate your answer and your points based on your definition of secularism, right? You don't want an examiner to take his definition, his or her definition of secularism. Okay, so let us be let us bring the person evaluator to our domain. Okay, so it would always be good to define secularism. So care should be taken to define secularism in the Indian context. We don't want the European or the American or the French notion of secularism, but define secularism in the Indian context. That would be the first thing. Then, like I said, the second point should be about an overall appraisal. So what is going to happen once you write the answer? So again, in this question, we are sure that legislature, executive and judiciary had some role in improving or empowering or institutionalizing or entrenching the idea of secularism in this country. Okay, there is no doubt to it. But does any one of you have even a faintest doubt that they themselves have done enough to damage the idea also? That is also there, right? So the role of legislature, executive and judiciary when it comes to upholding secularism, it's not one of 100% success. It is at best a mixed success. Okay, so your introduction second thing could say that while secularism, even when it is part of the basic structure, their role in upholding the secularism has at best been a mixed success, or what do you call it? It had yielded mixed results. So that would be the introduction thing. right? You bring 2 points. So the role of or here you can write it as role of legislature, executive, and judiciary has been mixed. Now you go to the body paragraph. Here it's very easy. The structure is very easy. First, legislature, the positive role played by them, example, the negative role played by them with example. Maybe you could write all this in point format, then move to the executive, positive role, negative role. So, since they are asking you to give a critique of the entire thing, you can maybe give some more weightage to the negative side of it. Okay, so maybe you can take a balance 40-60 range, or 40-60 could be the proportion. 60 should be the negative, 40 should be the positive. Judiciary, same thing, positive role, negative role. Okay, so overall it's a critique. So overall, by now, when you reach till this part of the answer, the overall feel that we are getting is that a very crucial idea of secularism, which is very essential for the success of this country or success of this society. And we have established by now that it hasn't been given a 100% commitment by these major organs of the state. So conclusion should hint at ways to improve, right? Improve the idea of secularism. Which are the institutions or which are the actors that can play a role in improving the principle of secularism in this country? And you could also mention that by improving the idea of secularism, what are the benefits this country can achieve? Okay, so ways to improve the concept and a brief mention of how improving the concept of secularism, how improving the practice of secularism can improve our society also. So I'm gathering that some of this goes down, but that's why I'm saying also, so you will get what is being written. So conclusion could be ways to improve the concept and a connection as to how improving the idea of secularism will help to improve the society. So overall, this is the structure. Okay, now we go to the actual content of it. Okay, so now let us jump to the actual answer. So introduction. So we have to define secularism. So secularism in the Indian context means that the state shall show equal respect to all religions. So that is one definition you can say. There shall not be any state religion, and the state shall equally respect all religions. Okay, so that could be the introduction. Moreover, Indian ideal of secularism rests on the principles of sarva, dharma, sama, bhava. Okay, so this is important. This is really important. So the Indian concept of secularism rests on the principle of sarva dharma samabhava. What is the idea of that? It means that all paths, even though they are different, leads to the same goal. So your paths could be different, but the destination is all same, or it shows the equality of destination in all religions. Okay, so this is something which Vivekananda has upheld. This is something which Ramakrishna, Swami Ramakrishna has upheld, Mahatma Gandhi has upheld, and that has found its way to the Indian concept of secularism. I would say you can bring the idea, the term Sarva Dharma Sama Bhava in the introduction itself. Then you could say that while secularism is part of the basic structure, the Indian state has a mixed success, or all that the Indian state had is a mixed success, or it's a mixed record, or the success of Indian state in upholding the principle of secularism is at best mixed. Okay, so here you have the key term: basic structure, mixed success, sarva dharma samabhava. These all key words should be there in the introduction itself. Okay, now we move to the body. Okay, first we look at the legislature. So maximum possible, if you have points, bring more less positive and more negative, but there could be some differences. Don't bother so much on all those things. So when it comes to legislature, what have been their role in upholding secularism in India? Okay, so the Constituent Assembly, which is an extension, or the legislature is actually an extension of the Constituent Assembly, or the first Constituent Assembly and the first Parliament were very much the same. So all that the Indian Constituent Assembly has done in the Indian Constitution can be taken as a role of Indian legislature so far. So first thing is that they brought in, or they were conscious enough, or they had a conscious intent to bring democracy with minority protection. Minority protection. So you might think, what is the connection between this and secularism? Because if democracy doesn't give protection to minority, it would result in majoritarianism. Okay, because democracy is all about giving every individual their own voice, right? So, for example, in India, if every individual is given their own voice, and when, as far as electoral democracy is concerned, it's the majority that decides stuff, right? So, in India, the Hindus are in a majority, and if they all stay together, it's basically the country would have everything what the Hindus would want, right? So you have to bring in specific provisions to protect the minorities of this country. Otherwise, having equal voice or equality between all people would remain a pipe dream. It's not going to actualize in the world. Okay, so democracy with minority protection was a constitutional commitment to secularism. So that could be your first point. Then, when it comes to fundamental rights, 25 to 28, it all upheld Indian citizens' right to profess, practice, propagate religion of their own choice. The state would show equal respect to all the religions. There won't be any discrimination between religions. Then, like I said, there won't be any official religion. So all these fundamental rights, then the preamble, then the spirit of fraternity and all in the, what you call, the preamble, right? Fraternity, then fundamental duties, DPSP. So all of this have various provisions which upheld the ideal of secularism, which all of which can be applied to the success of legislature. Then you have particularly the Representation of People Act, which says that seeking votes in the name of religion is an electoral offense. It can lead to disqualification of candidates. Recently, there has been a candidate in Kerala who got elected, and he was disqualified, saying that he sought vote on the basis of religion. So it happens. So I think all of these are positive role of legislature in upholding the secularism. So let us look at the negative also. So due to positive, let us bring it here. So what is a negative thing? I would say the most significant negative thing when it comes to the role of legislature should be the recent Citizenship Amendment Act. Okay, so that is a real blot on the secularist credential of the Indian legislature or the Indian parliament. So I think that should take the first place. So here the Indian state, through the legislation, has brought in a distinction in its treatment between different religions, or religion has been brought as a consideration for granting citizenship in this country, and that is a severe blot to the concept of secularism. So Citizenship Act is one thing. Then their consistent failure to implement uniform civil code. See, I would say, in real practice, in real practical terms, there is so much of valid criticism against UCC. But if you look at devoid of all those practical realities, you could say that implementing UCC is important for secularism. So I am aware that there are various criticisms to this, but it can be shown as a weakness of Indian legislature, at least as far as UPSC is concerned, right? It can fit in that scenario. That is why I am giving that point. Another weakness, okay, failure of UCC, and similarly, the Indian state or the Indian legislature has sanctified all the laws of the different religion, the customary laws, the personal laws of the Hindus, the Muslims, and the Christians in determining all those things, because all those laws have been given legal sanction by the legislature, and they have failed to bring about a UCC, the argument of secularism, or the strength of secularism have been weakened so much in this country. So that could be some of the negatives you can give in the context of legislature. So these are the positives, these are the negatives. Now we move to the executive and judiciary. So now we move to the pros and cons, or the secularist credential and negating that part when it comes to the executive. So what are the positives in the executive side? See, first thing could be government schemes, right? So there are enough and more government schemes that looks into the welfare of minority religious communities. So whenever you say there are schemes, government schemes for minority communities, that's also in the interest of secularism, right? Remember, democracy with minority protection is crucial for secularism. So any government scheme to protect minorities or to improve the condition of minority is uh, a affirmation of the ideal of secularism. Government schemes for minorities. So you can give the examples of all the Naya Roshni, and there are many schemes like this, Naya Roshni schemes, particular for Muslim women and things like that. So government schemes for minorities. Then there is something known as Seva Boj Yojana. So this is government reimburses uh, the money for food which the religious institutions give to the people, right? So that is the Seva Boj Yojana. So while the idea, it has an idea of eliminating hunger in this country, it also has what you call supporting religious institutions. Then you have tax exemptions for religious institutions. That is a government initiative. Then you have subsidies for pilgrimage, right? Religious pilgrimage, for Hajj subsidy, for what do you call your Kailas Yatra and all that, subsidy for pilgrimage. Then the Kartarpur pilgrimage. So basically, there's government subsidies for pilgrimage. So these are all positive government efforts to improve the situation. Then you could also say, as a minor point, effective implementation of affirmative action, especially OBC, the religious minorities that come under OBCs or the other backward classes, affirmative action under OBC. Successful implementation, if they are doing a good job, it's a positive thing of secularism, you could say. Now, I think we could go to the negatives of government machinery. Actually, there are so many negatives of the government machinery when it comes to secularism. One thing we could say is that, what you could say, yeah, there has been many instances of the state actively siding with state complicity in communal rights. Okay, by complicity means they are also guilty. Okay, they are also actively participating in all those wrongdoing. So there has been mention of this in Godra, the Sikh rights. So you shouldn't be. So the only balance that you have to give here is that you shouldn't be saying only Godra, but if you say Godra, you have to say the Sikh rights also, so that all the governments are equally guilty, right? So just play it like that. So you could give the examples of Godra, the Sikh, the post Babri Masjid thing, and all that. Okay, so all of these things, there has been studies which said that there was state complicity in communal rights, and this is about overall state, the government establishment. Then, particular is the case of law and order establishments. Studies by an IPS officer named Rai, I forgot his full name, by an IPS officer Rai from UP Cadre, has shown that the people from religious minority believe that in the occurrence of a communal right, the police side with the religious majority. For example, if it is a Hindu-Muslim fight that is playing out, the the people of the Muslim fold believe that the police would support only the Hindus. So that is a perceptional thing. It's I don't know, or nobody knows whether it is real or not, but the perception of the people is like that. So law and order is perceived to be communal. So that is a negative thing. Then again, law and order weakness or failure in protecting life and property of individuals from attack by Gorakshaks, right? So Gorakshaks, even though they say that their aim is to preserve cow and things like that, but in the guise of cow protection, they have unleashed wanton violence and loot and killings in this country. So that is something you could always say: weakness or failure in law and order machinery to protect life and property of people being attacked by Gorakshaks. That is another thing. Uh, Another thing is en masse transfer, en masse, ENMASS, which means a bulk transfer, en masse transfer of bureaucrats once a new government takes over. So, for example, this is also has been studied in UP. I don't think you have to give example UP every time, but just for your understanding, I am mentioning in UP it has been found that, see, normally we see this en masse transfer on political lines, but we also see an underlying religious line being followed in that. So that is also a violation of the spirit of secularism. Uh, so another thing is that the government appeases a religious minority for vote bank politics. So that is also another point you can write. Appeasement of minority. I don't know whether you can see all this. So appeasement of minority for vote bank politics. You have to see, I'm not writing it everywhere because there is a huge space constraint here, but just listen to what I'm saying and get all these points fully. Okay. So appeasement of minority for vote bank politics. So here you can give a real example. So immediately after the Shabanu judgment, which we'll see now, wherein the court decided that the alimony has to be given to the widowed Shabanu. Not widowed, I guess it was a divorcee, Shabanu. But then Rajiv Gandhi government immediately came up with an ordinance which said that for Muslim people that need not be the case. Okay, so that was a really quick abdication of secularism for the sake of political exigencies, right? So just for managing their political stability or just to hold the government together in politics, they abandoned the principle of secularism. So Shabanu judgment, the immediate aftermath activity of the government is a real abandon of the principle of secularism. So these are the pros and cons when it comes to the executive. Now we will come to the judiciary. So now we move to the last part of it. So it's the role by judiciary. So yeah, one point I just missed when it comes to the negative side of executive is that a poor implementation of Sachar committee recommendations. Do remember that, okay? SACHAR. Sachar committee has been a committee being made for a minority welfare. They have brought in certain recommendations before the government, and it has largely been poorly implemented. You can just check out some of the major Sachar committee recommendations because that can be put in different parts of answers. Okay, so that is also one negative thing. So when it comes to judiciary, what had been its pros? Okay, so what would be the biggest positive role of judiciary when it comes to secularism? Actually, judiciary has so much of positive thing. Biggest positive thing would be declaring secularism as a basic structure. Secularism as basic structure. It came in SR Bommai case. Okay, SR Bommai case is something we will see in different contexts, especially with respect to state emergency. So secularism as basic structure was declared in SR Bommai case. That is an important positive thing. Then another thing is essential religious practice test. Religious practice test devised by Supreme Court. Right? So what is this essential religious practice test? So what they look at is that they check out various practices that is being followed by a religion and see whether that is very essential or is that fundamental to the identity of being that person or identity of that religion. For example, triple talaq and Islam. Is triple talaq fundamental to someone being a Muslim? No, it's no, right? Because actually, it's owing to different cultural things, different historical cultural situations, that practice has crept into the Islamic fold. It's not something essential to being a Muslim. Similarly, same thing with Hindu. So there could be very regressive practices in different religions, which are part of the religion now, but those are not essential to the practice of that religion. So Supreme Court has brought in that test. So that has helped in improving different religions, the socio-cultural domain of different religions. So that is a important commitment to the ideal of secularism. So that is another thing. Then two major thing is Shahbanu judgment. That was about granting alimony to the Muslim divorcee. So it said that the divorced person should give her the alimony. That was one thing. Then there is a Mary Roy case. So this is again from Kerala. The Syrian Christian women didn't have inheritance rights to their father's property. So Mary Roy case, okay, it could be more famously known as, she's mother of Arundhati Roy, the famous activist writer lady. So Mary Roy case, in this lady succeeded in convincing the court to grant her inheritance rights of her parent. So these are some of the successes of judiciary when it comes to defending secularism. Okay. Some of the negatives. The major thing I would say, it is the Hindutva judgment. That is one of a huge blot on Indian judiciary. So it was brought in by J.S. Verma. It said that Hindutva or Hinduism, he essentially equated Hindutva and Hinduism, which is not true at all. So by equating Hindutva and Hinduism, and thereby saying that Hinduism is a way of life, basically that judgment allowed seeking votes in the name of religion. Okay, so actually it was like there was an allegation against a candidate that they sought votes in the name of religion, and the allegation was that they claimed that, okay, if you vote for this person, a Hindutva country can be brought in this country. So that was the motivation to vote in that lines. So when this was discovered and brought as a case, they said the argument was that Hindutva is just a way of life and it's not seeking votes on the basis of religion, which actually the court also agreed to. That was really strange, and it came from J.S. Verma. He's known for very progressive judgments. If you remember the criminal amendment after the Nirbhaya incident, that was all by J.S. Verma. But this Hindutva judgment was a clear law when it comes to judiciary upholding the principle of secularism. So by upholding Hindutva or Hinduism as a way of life, they essentially allowed asking votes in the name of religion. Asking votes in the name of Hindutva actually, but we know normally it would happen in the name of Hinduism also, which is largely seen as a religion by a good majority of people. So that is basically an electoral offense being just disguised by the judiciary themselves. Then another thing about judiciary's thing would be the judiciary intervening into the Sabarimala issue. And recently there has been so many interventions of judiciary into improving cultural space of different religions. For example, the Sabarimala or Triple Talaq. See, all of this can be seen as a positive effort to improve the socio-cultural scenario. But if you look at the dissenting judgment in Sabarimala, I guess it was Malhotra, Justice Indu Malhotra, I guess that was her name. She said the judiciary has no task to intervene in the affairs of religion, right? It has to be taken by someone else. So if you look in that sense, judiciary unnecessarily meddling with religious affairs could be, it's not that well in the interest of secularism, you could say. So that is another negative of judiciary when it comes to this thing. So I guess this is it. Okay, you saw the pros and cons of legislature, executive and judiciary. Now it's time to conclude. So overall, what was our idea? Overall, the tone or feel which we wanted to bring through this answer was that, so all of them have done some good and they have some done some bad. But what can we say overall about it? So on one side, you can say that secularism as a principle, it's still being respected in this country, right? So we can't find any instance where the state, the different organs of the state, where a legislature, executive, or judiciary has questioned the ideal of secularism in principle, right? In theory secularism is still upheld by all three organs of the state, and the issues come, or the weaknesses or the failures come largely in practicing this ideal of secularism by all these three organs. So that is something which can always exist everywhere, right? Whenever you think of an ideal scenario, you might agree in principle, but it's always difficult to practice. So you could see the issue of secularism in that similar manner. So that is one way in which you can conclude. While in principle, we still go by the principle of secularism, but in practice, we have floundered. So what can be done to improve that scenario? So when legislature, executive, and judiciary show different weaknesses in practicing secularism, who can step up? Right? So who is left in the body politic of this country? The citizens can step up. The citizenry can articulate or influence public opinions, and they can put tremendous pressure on the organs of the state to go by the principle of secularism. So that is one solution you can say. Whether it will happen is a different scenario, and media can also play a crucial role. Then the civil society. So the civil society, which included the citizens, the NGOs, and all that, they can play a crucial role, and the media can play a crucial role to make sure that these three organs not only follow in principle but also practice the ideal of secularism. That is one thing. And you could also say that, and it's very essential for these three organs to be pressured to practice, or it is very essential for these three organs to practice secularism in a proper sense, because it is only with secularism, or it's only through practice of secularism, this multicultural society of India can survive. Right? Just imagine the other scenario. If there is no secularism in this country, how do you think all these religions, we have all religions of the world living in this country, right? So there could be n number of communal scuffles and troubles that would tear apart the body politic of this country. So that is going to affect our social cohesion, that is going to affect our ability to come together and cooperate, that is going to affect or undermine our economic progress. So all of these things could happen. So as long as secularism is upheld, not only in practice, not only in theory, but also in practice, the multicultural nature of Indian society, and thereby the progress of economy, could take a severe beating. So that could be your concluding lines. So once again, practice has to be instilled. Media, civil society, citizen has to be pressurizing or enforcing force, so that this multicultural society survives. Maybe you could even draw a comparison to the increasing religious polarization and racial polarization that is affecting most of the developed countries of the world. For example, US, UK, and all these societies. Okay, maybe slightly hinting to all those scenarios, you could draw a wonderful conclusion. Okay, so I hope that is it. Thank you.